Good evening, all of you. The title of our paper is Center-State Relations and Subnational Governments International Engagements, Evidence from India. In fact, it is impact of center-state relations on subnational governments' international engagement. And I can barely hide my enthusiasm because the kind of findings that we have got, but it's so cold here that it's helping me a lot. but at the it has made the job of hiding enthusiasm easy, but it has made another job of hiding nervousness difficult because I'm shivering. I don't know I'm shivering because of this or because of nervousness. Anyway, so this paper is about foreign policy activism of subnational governments in India, and it looks into two dimensions of internationalization of India's states since 1999. In the first part, we'll explore economic diplomacy of subnational governments, India's states, and in the second part, we'll examine non-economic, or we can say we'll go beyond economic engagement. And economic part I'll deal, and Sandra and Johannes will deal with the non-economic part. So, in the first section, we quantitatively examine the extent to which the political relation between center and state helps us explain the regional kind of variation that we see in terms of inflow of foreign direct investments. And in fact, we decided to undertake this quantitative study of this kind of relationship because our qualitative analysis for this part revealed a baffling contradiction. On one hand, the central government appears to be encouraging all states, irrespective of their political affiliation, to take steps to improve their business environment and attract investments. But on the other hand, we find that opposition-ruled states, they are accusing the central government of giving stepmotherly treatment to the projects located in their states and creating hurdles to keep these projects dormant for many, many years. And in the same vein, government is on one hand speaking as government of India, and their ministers at some point of time, we see, I don't know whether it is inadvertent or very conscious kind of statements, acting on behalf of their party, political party, speaking or standing for their party. And to illustrate, let me quote a recent statement made by External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj on 23rd October 2016. She was calling for greater investment in Madhya Pradesh, a BJP-ruled state. She said, "My parliamentary constituency Vidisha falls within this state, and Budni, the assembly constituency of state's Chief Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan, also falls within my constituency, so those making investments here will avail special benefits and will get direct assistance from the foreign minister herself." So instead of making an economic argument, she is, attracting investment based on political arguments. So we were puzzled at what's going on. So in order to find out what's going on, we decided to take our sample from our data from 12 major states over a period of 14 years. And since political determinants of foreign direct investments are relevant only under the assumption of favorable economic environment prevailing in a particular state, so we control for per capita income, population density, urbanization, infrastructure, and human development. And this is what we find. First of all, the states where the chief minister shares party affiliation with the prime minister's party, those kind of states are really winner in the race of attracting foreign direct investments. this is the stand-alone effect in our regression analysis. But as we include other variables, which are three important political variables, the correlation coefficient of this variable, that is affiliated chief minister, loses its statistical significance. It is still positive, and magnitude is respectable, but still it loses. It's on the borderline of statistical significance. Affiliated chief minister is getting most investments, but there are certain exceptions, and these exceptions result because of these following three factors. One is strong state chief minister. How do we measure strong state chief minister? By percentage of state assembly seats in state legislature, and we find that with every 1% rise in seats, legislative assembly seats over and above 50%, there is 0.1% gain in terms of per capita foreign direct investment. And we also see that the opposition ruled state, Gujarat, at that point of time Narendra Modi was chief minister, that state attracted during UPA 1 and UPA 2, that state attracted 2.5 times more FDI than the average of all India. So this is one. Second is what we call shared rule effect, and this is most interesting. In a state which is non-affiliated, a non-affiliated state becomes attractive as the number of MPs belonging to Prime Minister's party increase. So this is an interaction variable, and we find that on one hand, when we see that 1% rise in seats which are controlled by the Prime Minister's party give rise to 0.6% rise in increase in per capita FDI. But when we see non-affiliated state, so in a non-affiliated state, with every 1% increase in seats controlled by the Prime Minister's party, there is 1.5% increase in per capita foreign direct investments. So this kind of this is in fact most politically secure state as far as investors are concerned, because they are bringing both the power contenders present in a state to the table. They are negotiating with both parties which are rival in that particular state and have substantial support base in the state. So that makes, and the third and the final finding is that outside supporters are outstanding gainers. Like they are getting 59% more foreign direct investments as compared to the Prime Minister party ruled states. So in nutshell, our findings are an important reminder that we must not ignore the role of policy context in understanding the successes and failures of economic diplomacy of subnational governments, and also these findings also bring to fore the need to take domestic intergovernmental relations seriously in studies of subnational governments' international engagements. Thank you. Sandra.
Okay, so I will continue focusing on more on the field of foreign policy, less on the economic part. And we've started, therefore, building on Chanchal's first paper, which is a standalone paper actually, to look at the engagement of single states in foreign policy activities in India. And what we will present here will focus mainly on two cases, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal, which we've chosen as illustrations for our argument, because in both cases we can observe a high degree of foreign policy activism, and we can see nice variation over time according to these different constellations of political parties in power in the state and at the center in New Delhi. We found that the field of foreign policy seems to work with a slightly different logic as compared to the field of foreign direct investment attraction, of course, because on foreign policy issues in general, we would assume that states don't compete with each other in the goals they achieve. They pursue some kind of broadly defined national interest. But in some cases, there are substantial differences over foreign policy issues between single Indian states and the central government. So we're interested in knowing more and in explaining the mechanisms at play there. We argue that we can explain three very different mechanisms depending on the foreign policy issues we are looking at, of course. So on the one hand, first, there are issues that are not directly affecting the state, that are of no specific relevance to any party in a specific state. And here we can expect at least a lack of conflict or even cooperation between the center and the state, no matter of the political affiliation, in the name of some broader defined national interest. So these would be issues like regarding India's global role, its rise in global politics, perhaps its policy of multi-alignment, etc. So fairly uncontested issues. Second, there are foreign policy issues that are relevant for some parties, but in terms of ideology. So, for example, in some cases, parties might dissent, and this might have an impact on the politics of single Indian states, but not due to local issues. So think of the Communist Party of India Marxist, which withdrew its support to the governing coalition in New Delhi in 2008 over the nuclear deal with the United States. So it was a Communist Party opposing this nuclear deal. This was certainly an ideologically driven issue, but it had an implication on single states. For example, in Kerala, which was governed by this party, the CPIM, we had a shift then in the constellation. The party was not an external supporter anymore of the central government. It became an opposition party. But this had nothing to do with specific local politics. So that's the second case, the second issue area. And third, and these are the most interesting cases, and what we'll be looking at in some detail, we have cases which are of high relevance to local politics, to state parties in particular. And these parties will then make use or not of their party affiliation with the government in Delhi in order to achieve their goals. And here we think, similar to the field of FDI attraction, it really makes a difference whether we have a party governing the state, which is the same as that of the Prime Minister in Delhi, if it's part of the governing coalition at the center, if it's an external supporter, or if it belongs to the opposition. So we have these four different constellations. So I have 3 minutes left to talk about the case of Tamil Nadu. We'll just focus here on issues that were very crucial to the population and the political parties in Tamil Nadu, mainly, of course, the situation of the Tamils in Sri Lanka, the course of the civil war there, the settlement of the war, India's role in it, and later the investigation of human rights violations and war crimes, among others, by the Sri Lankan government. So here over time, and that's the interesting about it, we had different constellations between 2000 and 2014 with the two big parties, the DMK and the AIA-DMK, alternating in power and being at times coalition partner and at times opposition party with regard to the central government. So during the years 2000 to 2001, for example, we had the DMK leading the state government and being a coalition partner of the central government. And here, as expected, we had no big conflict over the Sri Lankan issue between the state and the center. So the Sri Lankan conflict was certainly relevant to the Tamil Nadu government and parties, but there was some degree of agreement that India shouldn't change its hands-off policies, which it had pursued since the end of the IPKF mission. Later, from 2007 until the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, we also had a constellation of the DMK governing in Tamil Nadu, being a coalition partner of now of the Congress-led UPA-1 government in Delhi. And here, again, we saw some coherence between state and central governments. So there was a lot of rhetorical pressure from Tamil Nadu, certainly about the situation of the Sri Lankan Tamils, about India's quiet support for the military offensive of the Sri Lankan government. But this pressure didn't go so far as to really, well, having the DMK leaving the coalition, for example. And in fact, afterwards, many people said that actually the Tamil parties left Sri Lankan Tamils alone in a certain sense. We have a different constellation, one of opposition between state and central government later in 2012 to 14. Tamil Nadu was governed by the AIA DMK, and we saw increased pressure here on New Delhi concerning the investigation of human rights violations that happened in Sri Lanka by the UN Human Rights Council. And in fact, in 2012 and 13, New Delhi voted in favor of resolutions calling for an investigation of such violations. And this happened, and that's the point, under strong pressure from Tamil Nadu. But the interesting thing is that such pressure didn't just come from the government, but also from the opposition party in Tamil Nadu, the DMK, which was a member of the coalition in New Delhi. So what we see here is a constellation where all political actors had a very similar line in Tamil Nadu and basically considered this issue so important, and also an opposition party from the state was in the position to put pressure on the central government in New Delhi, and actually later the DMK even pulled out of the UPA2 coalition over the Tamil issue, and because this was not termed genocide. Okay, very complex domestic constellations for the foreign guests not working on India. So what can we learn from this case? We can learn, I would say, that there might be policy issues like the Sri Lanka situation, which are so relevant in the state that all parties there across the political spectrum will try to capitalize on it, and that even a coalition partner of the central government, which is in the opposition in the state, can have an influence on the central government's policies. So this is something we will need to include in our further analysis, and we'll move to Bangladesh now, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Yeah, West Bengal is another interesting case with regard to its effect on India's foreign policy, and one that has been mentioned already by Ashok in the previous panel and by Smuti in this one. Bordering Bangladesh, most of the key items on the bilateral agenda between India and Bangladesh have strong implications for West Bengal. So the land border agreement was mentioned, water sharing was mentioned too, migration issues, transit rights, all of those. Also West Bengal's cultural ties with Bangladesh remain strong, so there's this dimension to it too. West Bengal's geographical location also make it a key stakeholder in India's Act East policy, with the aim of improving goodwill in Bangladesh as one of the core concerns for both the previous and the current government. And like Tamil Nadu, West Bengal has played varying roles in the center as opposition party during the NDA government 1999 to 2003, as outside supporter during the first UPA government and coalition partner, and now again with the TMC in power as opposition party in the center. So from the outset, it seems as if West Bengal made itself felt in foreign policy most vigorously as a coalition partner, which is much in line with the kind of theory Chanchal presented earlier, while being less impactful as opposition party. But there's a certain twist to it, I would argue. So why is that? As coalition partner, Chief Minister West Bengal Chief Minister Banerjee boycotted the long-planned landmark state visit by then Prime Minister Singh to Dhaka in 2011, thereby foiling an agreement on land boundaries. The agreement was mentioned, water sharing and transit, that was much desired by both New Delhi and Dhaka, and which put major strains on the bilateral relation between India and Bangladesh. In contrast to that, Chief Minister Banerjee, now as opposition party in the center, joined Prime Minister Modi in 2015 when he visited Dhaka, whereby an agreement on the land boundary and transit rights was finally agreed on, and thereby she also delivered, in a way, Modi his perhaps most widely celebrated individual foreign policy success. So in that sense, one could argue that sort of the West Bengal's effect on India's foreign policy was more striking in 2011 than in 2015. However, the chief minister's agreement to the deal, although not formally required, came at a price, and a pretty high one, I would argue. So water sharing was not included in the 2015 agreement, although it's one of the most pressing issues on behalf of the Bangladeshis, and proved to be the most controversial in 2011. So it was precluded in 2015. Also, Banerjee was allowed to share some of the public attention and appraisal with both Prime Ministers Modi and Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh in 2015, in addition to receiving a substantial compensation package for her party's consent to strong central government seemed to be unwilling to involve Chief Minister Banerjee sufficiently, whereas in 2015, at least to the according to the reports I'm aware of, Banerjee was consulted consistently and well in advance. And nonetheless, it's kind of interesting that in the context of a majoritarian government, since 2014, bargaining power has tilted towards the center. And the constitutional amendment needed for the 2015 boundary agreement could have passed upper house of parliament without the TMC's approval, without West Bengal ruling party approval, given that Congress had declared it would support the bill before that already. So the 2015 agreement, the price I referred to earlier, excluding water, but including a substantial recompensation package for West Bengal, and the close consultation of Banerjee. All of that sort of raises the question why the center was willing to pay such a high price in order to bring West Bengal, the West Bengal government on board. And the answer seems to be that what Chanchal referred to earlier, strong state leadership, plays an important role, or strong legislative support of the state government seems to play an important role. Also with the BJP trying to gain ground in West Bengal, political reasons apparently made the center to give ground to TMC demands, despite of it being an opposition party. Okay, so finally I'd like to comment on just make some brief comments on the present government's supposed willingness to involve states in foreign policy making. I think that's a sort of interesting dynamic going on there, and also draw some conclusions regarding its prospects, regarding paradiplomacy's prospects under majoritarian governments. So, as the Indian guests here know, as Chief Minister of Gujarat, Modi pioneered states' foreign engagements. Vibrant Gujarat is one of the sort of buzzwords there. And before being elected as Prime Minister, and since then, Modi declared he wanted to empower states in external affairs. However, we observe that affiliated chief ministers, chief ministers affiliated to the governing party have been the government's favorite in this domain as well. In 2015, for instance, Modi sent Chief Minister of Maharashtra of the Prime Minister's party to the Davos summit as India's representative. Right? And Chandrababu Naidu, Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, a coalition partner, was sent to China. Also, for the first ever provincial leaders forum meeting between India and China in 2015, Modi decided that from the Indian side, again, Chief Minister Fadnavis of Maharashtra and Gujarat Chief Minister Patel participated, both of the Prime Minister's party, whereas Nitish Kumar, then opposition Chief Minister, was ignored despite the fact that China had expressed interest in cooperating with his state of Bihar. So all of this shows maybe that Indian states failed to establish a lasting mechanism by which they could affect India's foreign policy making, foreign engagements beyond insular cases and party political affiliation. So in a way one could argue that state governments, state parties had almost 1.5 decades, the time of coalition government in India, to pressurize a fairly or comparatively weak center to create strong subnationally oriented or at least collaborative institutions. But they failed to do so, and so right. So one could wonder whether that was a opportunity lost. Thanks.